The origins of the gladiators stretch deep into the early fabric of ancient Italy, long before the grandeur of the Roman Colosseum and the thunderous roar of its crowds. The spectacle of men fighting to the death did not begin as entertainment, but as sacred ritual, an offering to the gods and the spirits of the dead. Among the Etruscans, a people who flourished in central Italy before Rome's rise, funeral rites often included violent contests between armed men. These duels were not driven by cruelty or sport, but by reverence. They believed that the blood of a warrior could honor the deceased and appease the underworld deities, ensuring a peaceful passage for the soul of the departed. Death was not viewed as a tragedy, but as a continuation of existence in another realm, and sacrifice was a means of spiritual balance. When Rome absorbed Etruscan culture, it also absorbed this grim ritual. The earliest recorded Roman gladiatorial combats occurred in 264 BCE, when the sons of Junius Brutus Pera staged a fight to honor their father's memory. It took place in the Forum Boarium, where 3 pairs of slaves fought to the death. At this stage, these spectacles were small, personal, and tied to mourning. Yet the Romans, always masters of adaptation, soon began transforming this ritual into something far larger and more public. Over time, the private funerary contests evolved into state-sponsored spectacles. The solemnity of sacrifice gave way to the thrill of blood sport. By the 2nd century BCE, gladiatorial games had become a common feature of Roman public life, moving from the quiet of tombs to the heart of bustling cities. This transformation was not accidental. Rome was expanding rapidly, conquering new territories and absorbing diverse peoples. With expansion came wealth, inequality, and restlessness among the lower classes. Politicians quickly realized that the games could serve a purpose beyond religion. They could become instruments of control. Gladiatorial shows, known as munera, offered a way to win the loyalty and admiration of the masses. These events were lavish and free to attend, offering food, entertainment, and a rare chance for commoners to witness the power of their leaders firsthand. In the phrase later coined by the poet Juvenal, the Roman people were satisfied with bread and circuses, food to fill their bellies and games to distract their minds. The bread and circuses policy became one of Rome's most effective political tools. By providing constant spectacles of violence, emperors and politicians pacified the population and diverted their attention from corruption, wars, or social decay. The arena became a stage for propaganda as much as for combat. Every drop of blood spilled was a reminder of Rome's dominance, its order, and its power over life and death. Gladiators were slaves, prisoners of war, and criminals. But in the arena, they became symbols of the empire's might and its moral control. Their deaths reinforced the message that Rome, and Rome alone, decided who lived and who perished. Few leaders understood this power better than Julius Caesar. In 65 BCE, while still aedile, a relatively minor political office, Caesar staged grand games featuring hundreds of gladiators and exotic animals from Africa. These events were meant to dazzle the public and outshine his political rivals. The cost was enormous, and the Senate tried to limit his extravagance by restricting the number of gladiators one man could sponsor. But the damage, or perhaps the genius, was already done. Caesar had discovered the intoxicating link between spectacle and popularity. His games made him the darling of the people, cementing his reputation as a generous and powerful leader. When he later rose to dictator, he continued to use the arena as a political stage, presenting himself as the benevolent ruler who gave the people what they loved most: blood, excitement, and victory. After Caesar's assassination, his adopted heir, Augustus, elevated this use of spectacle to imperial perfection. Augustus rebranded gladiatorial games as symbols of Roman unity and divine order. While he limited the excesses of private individuals who held games for personal glory, he transformed them into state-controlled propaganda. The emperor became the ultimate sponsor, the editor of games that celebrated military triumphs, imperial anniversaries, and divine favor. Every event was carefully choreographed to reflect Augustus's vision of peace and power under his rule. The amphitheater itself became a microcosm of the empire. The emperor sat at the center, above all others, while the masses below reveled in the deadly beauty of Roman dominance. In this way, the evolution of gladiatorial combat mirrored the transformation of Rome itself, from a city of rituals and tribes to an empire of spectacle and control. What began as a somber act of sacrifice became the heartbeat of Roman entertainment, a mirror of its society's hunger for power, violence, and order. Through the calculated use of blood and glory, Rome built not just an empire of land, but an empire of the mind. One in which the crowd's cheers were as powerful as legions on the march. The gladiator's sword, once a symbol of death for the dead, became the sharp edge of imperial propaganda, cutting through fear, rebellion, and even truth itself. The making of a gladiator was a process as brutal as the battles that awaited them. It began with capture, enslavement, or desperate choice. Most gladiators were not volunteers. They were prisoners of war, criminals, or slaves bought specifically for combat. When Rome's legions conquered foreign lands, thousands of captives were brought back in chains, destined not for execution, but for the arena. Others were condemned criminals, noxii, sentenced to die fighting. Yet not all who entered the gladiatorial ranks were forced. In the later Republic and early Empire, some free men, crushed by debt or seduced by fame, chose to sign contracts binding themselves to the life of a gladiator. These auctorati sold their freedom for coin, gambling their lives for a chance at glory. Whether slave or volunteer, once a man crossed the gates of the ludus, the gladiator training school, he ceased to be a man in the eyes of Rome. He became property, an investment of flesh and discipline. The Ludi Gladiatori were not schools in the modern sense, but prisons designed for transformation. Behind their walls, men were broken down and reforged into living weapons. Rome maintained several such schools, the most famous being the Ludus Magnus near the Colosseum, built by Emperor Domitian. Here, hundreds of men lived under the strictest control, their days dictated by training, diet, and punishment. The first step was physical conditioning. Gladiators were trained to endure heat, exhaustion, and pain. Every muscle was honed to perfection, not for beauty, but for function, the economy of killing. Wooden swords, rudis, were used to drill movements endlessly until they became instinct. The drills were brutal. Strikes, dodges, rolls, and footwork repeated for hours under the lash of overseers. The man who ruled over this world was the lanista, the owner and trainer of gladiators. A lanista was both businessman and master, purchasing, training, and leasing fighters for public games. Though often despised by polite Roman society, he held immense power over his men. To him, each gladiator was an investment. He provided food, shelter, and medical care, not out of kindness, but out of financial interest. Dead men earned nothing. Beneath the lanista were experienced gladiators called doctores, veterans who taught the art of specific fighting styles. A trainee might be molded into a murmillo with a heavy shield and gladius, a retiarius who fought with net and trident, or a secutor trained to chase and kill. Each type had its own armor, weaponry, and strategy, carefully designed to create balance and spectacle in the arena. Life inside the ludus was harsh but strangely structured. Gladiators were fed a high-energy diet, rich in barley, beans, and porridge, a mix that earned them the nickname hordearii, or barley men. Contrary to popular myth, they were not starved. They were fattened. A layer of fat protected muscles from shallow cuts and made wounds less deadly. Medical care was surprisingly advanced, as doctors specializing in wounds and fractures were employed to keep the fighters alive. Yet, the ludus was still a cage. Armed guards patrolled the compound, ensuring no one escaped. Discipline was absolute. Disobedience met with lashes, isolation, or even death. But within this prison, a strange form of camaraderie flourished. Gladiators shared everything: their meals, their pain, and their dreams of survival. Bonds formed in the shadow of death, where loyalty meant life. Some gladiators became brothers, watching each other's backs in the training yard and praying they would not meet as enemies in the arena. Others hardened themselves emotionally, suppressing all empathy, focusing only on the next fight. The ludus forged men not only through physical endurance, but through mental reshaping. They learned to face pain with pride, fear with ferocity, and death with calm acceptance. Despite their status as slaves, gladiators occupied a strange and paradoxical position in Roman society. They were despised for their low birth, yet adored for their bravery. Crowds cheered their names, women admired their scars, and poets sang of their valor. Successful fighters could achieve fame and wealth unimaginable for common men. Some were even freed after winning enough matches, granted a wooden sword, the rudis, as a symbol of liberty. Yet even freedom did not erase the mark of the arena. Once a gladiator, always a gladiator in the eyes of Rome. The psychological transformation was perhaps the most profound part of becoming a gladiator. In the beginning, many resisted, shouting, rebelling, dreaming of escape. But day after day, pain stripped away weakness and fear. The rhythm of the training yard, the clang of weapons, and the smell of blood became part of their identity. They learned to suppress mercy, for mercy could mean death. Their emotions were channeled into precision and aggression. They began to think not as men, but as instruments of survival. In the arena, hesitation was fatal. Emotion was weakness. To survive, they learned the code of the gladiator: discipline, courage, endurance, and respect for the art of combat. Death was no longer an enemy, but a companion. The best gladiators faced it with grace, believing that honor death was better than fear in life. This code made them both admirable and terrifying, admired even by those who condemned them. By the time a man stepped into the arena, he was no longer the person he once was. The ludus had stripped him of identity, reshaped his body, and reshaped his mind. What walked out into the sand was not merely a fighter. It was a creation of Rome's ruthless genius for spectacle. The gladiator had become something greater and lesser than human. A weapon of flesh, crafted for one purpose: to fight, bleed, and die for the glory of an empire that demanded blood for entertainment. The Roman gladiatorial games were not chaotic brawls of untrained men, but highly structured spectacles governed by precise rules, styles, and pairings. Each gladiator belonged to a distinct class with specific weapons, armor, and fighting techniques designed to balance the contest and thrill the audience. The arena was a theater of strategy as much as it was of blood, a place where skill, discipline, and calculated risk determined life or death. To the Romans, every duel was both entertainment and art, the clash of strength, agility, and intellect embodied through the various armaturi, or types of gladiators. Among the most iconic was the murmillo, the heavyweight of the arena. His name derived from the Greek word mormelos, meaning fish, a nod to the fish-shaped crest that adorned his large, crested helmet. The murmillo was a towering figure, heavily armed, and often matched against lighter, faster opponents. His equipment included a large rectangular shield, scutum, a short, double-edged sword, gladius, greaves on his legs, and a thick belt to protect his midsection. His helmet's broad face guard, with narrow eye slits, provided solid protection, but limited vision and airflow. Fighting in the style of the Roman legionary, the murmillo relied on discipline and endurance. He advanced methodically, using his shield to deflect blows and close in for the kill, with short, powerful thrusts. Every movement was deliberate. He could not afford wasted energy in his heavy armor. His most frequent opponent was the Thrax or Thracian. Inspired by warriors from Thrace, modern Bulgaria and parts of Greece, the Thrax was a smaller, faster fighter whose style emphasized agility and cunning. He carried a small rectangular or square shield, parmula, and wielded a curved short sword, sica, ideal for hooking and slicing around the large shields of opponents like the murmillo. His helmet was distinct, decorated with a high crest and a griffin motif, a symbol of vigilance and ferocity. The Thrax's fighting style depended on quick footwork and deception. He would dart in and out of range, aiming for the murmillo's exposed limbs or neck. Their duels became classics of the arena, the grounded power of Rome's soldier versus the nimble trickery of the barbarian. It was a symbolic contest, Rome against the foreigner, replayed endlessly for an audience that never tired of seeing Roman might triumph over the exotic foe. The secutor, meaning chaser or pursuer, was the retiaris' natural nemesis, the embodiment of relentless pursuit. His armor was smooth and minimal to prevent the retiaris' net from snagging it. He wore a round-topped helmet with tiny eye holes, designed to deflect the trident's prongs, and carried the same heavy shield and short sword as the murmillo. The contrast between the two could not have been greater. The retiaris' was swift and elusive, the secutor's slow but unstoppable. The spectacle lay in their balance, brain versus brawn, precision versus power. The retiaris' darted and feinted, seeking to entangle or exhaust his opponent, while the secutor closed the distance with patient determination. Their duels were lessons in strategy, each man reading the other's movement, predicting attacks, and exploiting weaknesses in real time. Among the most visually striking fighters was the Dimicharis, the two-sword man. As the name suggests, he fought with a sword in each hand, often two short gladii or curved blades. Deprived of a shield, the Dimicharis relied entirely on agility and defense, using a whirlwind of slashes and feints to overwhelm his enemies. His fighting style was breathtaking to watch, combining athleticism and precision in a constant dance of motion. He could strike from either side, making him unpredictable. The crowd loved his daring and showmanship, for every fight demanded near-perfect timing and reflexes. However, his lack of heavy protection meant he lived and died by his speed. A single miscalculated step could spell instant death. Equally fascinating were the bestiarii, the beast fighters of Rome. Unlike traditional gladiators, their opponents were not human but wild animals. Lions, leopards, tigers, owls, or even elephants imported from distant lands. There were two kinds of bestiarii: condemned criminals forced into combat as execution, and trained professionals who specialized in fighting beasts. The professionals were armed with spears, daggers, or whips, and sometimes wore light armor for mobility. These men faced unimaginable danger, as the animals were often starved and provoked to frenzy before release. The fights symbolized man's dominance over nature, a theme that resonated deeply with Roman audiences. To see a man slay a lion or face down a charging bull was to witness the empire's power embodied in human form. Other specialized gladiators added variety and spectacle to the games. The hoplomachus, modeled after the Greek hoplite, carried a round shield and a spear, fighting with precision and defensive skill. His typical opponent was the murmillo, making their encounters a recreation of Greece versus Rome, a symbolic clash of ancient cultures. The Samnite, one of the earliest and heaviest gladiator types, wore full armor and a plumed helmet, representing the Samnite warriors once defeated by Rome. As time passed, this type evolved into the murmillo, maintaining the tradition of heavy armored combatants. The prolocator was unique in that he fought only against others of his own kind. His breastplate and visor-like helmet offered superior protection, and their fights often demonstrated technical mastery rather than sheer brutality. Despite their deadly profession, gladiators were not reckless killers. Their success depended on discipline, calculation, and an understanding of both their own strengths and their opponent's weaknesses. Fights were not random, but carefully matched by the lanista to create balance and excitement. A light fighter faced a heavy one, a long weapon countered by a short blade, defense against offense. Each pairing told a story of skill versus brute force, civilization versus barbarism, order versus chaos. To survive, a gladiator needed far more than strength. He had to study his opponent's movements, feint to draw attacks, conserve stamina, and strike only when opportunity arose. One wrong decision could be fatal. Many veterans became experts at reading body language, the subtle shift of weight, the flick of a wrist, that signaled an incoming strike. They learned to use the sand itself, maneuvering to position the sun behind their opponent's eyes or to force them onto uneven ground. Every movement in the arena was deliberate, every breath part of a larger calculation. Thus, gladiatorial combat was not mindless slaughter, but an intricate and deadly form of performance art. It was a sport with rules, traditions, and expectations. The fighters knew that to entertain the crowd was to live another day. Victory brought money, fame, and sometimes freedom. Defeat could bring mercy if the fight was honorable, or death if the performance displeased the audience. The greatest gladiators became legends, their fighting styles studied and imitated across the empire. They embodied the paradox of Rome itself: savage yet disciplined, brutal yet artful. A civilization that found beauty in blood. In the end, the types of gladiators represented more than mere categories of warriors. They symbolized the complexity of Roman values: power, courage, endurance, and control. Each fight was a reflection of Rome's belief that strength and spectacle were the foundations of greatness. Every clash in the arena was not only a battle for life, but a vivid demonstration of the empire's soul, calculated, ruthless, and eternally hungry for glory. The Colosseum, or the Flavian Amphitheatre, as it was known in ancient times, stood as the beating heart of Rome's obsession with spectacle, power, and death. Rising from the ruins of Nero's Golden House, it was both a gift to the people and a declaration of imperial control. Built by Emperor Vespasian and completed by his son Titus in 80 CE, the Colosseum was more than an arena. It was a symbol of Rome's might, capable of seating over 50,000 spectators in tiered perfection. Its towering arches, marble facades, and engineering brilliance reflected the empire's mastery of architecture and its relentless hunger for dominance. Constructed with concrete and travertine stone, the Colosseum stood as an everlasting statement. Rome could build eternal monuments, not for gods or kings, but for the spectacle of man's triumph and suffering. The symbolism of the Colosseum was unmistakable. It rose from the very grounds that once housed Nero's decadent palace, a deliberate act of political messaging. Where Nero had built for himself, Vespasian built for the people. It was a monument to Rome's resilience after the chaos of civil war, a space where emperors could unite their subjects under the shared thrill of blood and entertainment. Every brick proclaimed the power of the emperor. Every roar of the crowd echoed his approval. The amphitheatre became the ultimate theatre of life and death, where the emperor sat at the center of the world, dispensing judgment with a gesture of his thumb. Behind its grand facade lay an astonishingly complex logistical system. Beneath the wooden arena floor was a vast network of tunnels, chambers, and elevators known as the Hypogeum. This underground labyrinth was the unseen heart of the spectacle. Here, hundreds of slaves, stagehands, and animal handlers worked tirelessly to prepare for the day's events. Trapdoors opened suddenly to release lions, tigers, or bears, giving the illusion that beasts emerged from the earth itself. Mechanical lifts hoisted cages, scenery, and fighters onto the sand in carefully timed sequences. The Romans' ingenuity turned the Colosseum into a living machine of entertainment, the ancient world's most advanced stage. The scale of the logistics was staggering. Exotic animals from across the empire, elephants from Africa, tigers from Asia, crocodiles from Egypt, were transported to Rome in chains, symbols of imperial reach. During the inaugural games under Titus, thousands of animals and men were slaughtered in a single week. The Romans even staged mock naval battles, naumachia, inside the arena by flooding its floor, recreating sea fights between miniature fleets. These spectacles demanded immense planning and resources, but they also served a political purpose. They showcased Rome's engineering genius and its dominion over nature and man alike. The day's events followed a carefully orchestrated order designed to build anticipation and emotional intensity. The morning began with venetanes, or beast hunts. Skilled hunters and bestiari battled wild animals in elaborate displays of courage and control. These events symbolized Rome's conquest of the natural world, as lions and leopards fell beneath Roman steel. The midday brought a darker spectacle: public executions. Criminals, deserters, or traitors were executed in gruesome ways, often reenacting myths where men were devoured by beasts or burned alive. These executions served as moral lessons, reinforcing the idea that Roman justice was absolute and divine. Finally, the afternoon was reserved for the main attraction, the gladiatorial combats. As the sun reached its peak, the gates opened and trained fighters entered the arena to the roar of the crowd. Trumpets blared, and the audience watched as pairs of gladiators clashed in ritualized combat, a blend of art, strategy, and savagery. The air was thick with dust, sweat, and anticipation. Victorious fighters were celebrated as heroes. The defeated awaited the emperor's signal, a gesture that decided their fate. A raised thumb could mean mercy, while a turned thumb signaled death. The crowd often influenced the decision, chanting for blood or mercy, their voices echoing through the colossal stone walls. The emperors understood the immense political power of these games. To sponsor spectacles was to win hearts. Vespasian, Titus, and later emperors like Trajan and Commodus used the arena as a stage of imperial theatre. Each show reminded the people that their ruler was generous, powerful, and divinely favoured. The games distracted the masses from famine, wars, or political unrest. The ultimate embodiment of Rome's policy of panem et circenses, bread and circuses. By providing free food and endless entertainment, emperors ensured loyalty and obedience. Yet beneath the cheers and grandeur, the Colosseum was a monument to contradiction, a temple of civilization that glorified death. Its sands drank the blood of thousands, human and animal alike, all in the name of order and spectacle. To the Romans, it was proof of their greatness, a civilization that found its deepest unity not in peace, but in the theatre of blood. In the brutal world of the Roman arena, fame and death walked hand in hand. For most gladiators, the sands of the Colosseum meant humiliation and inevitable demise. Yet for a few, it became a path to glory, admiration, and even immortality. Against all odds, some fighters rose from the status of slaves to become celebrities of the ancient world. Their names were whispered in taverns, carved on walls, and shouted by thousands of fans in the stands. Women adored them, children idolized them, and even soldiers, the hardened backbone of Rome, respected their courage and skill. To the Romans, these men embodied the virtues of strength, endurance, and fearlessness that their empire revered. Female fascination with gladiators was a well-known phenomenon. Poets like Juvenal mocked high-born Roman women who secretly longed for the embrace of these sweat-stained killers. The combination of danger and masculinity made gladiators irresistible figures of forbidden allure. Rings, lamps, and graffiti have been found bearing their names, tokens of a fame that transcended their lowly origins. They were slaves, yet they commanded more admiration than many free men. The paradox was striking. The very men society condemned as property were celebrated as heroes for their ability to face death without fear. This contradiction lay at the heart of the gladiators' honor. Though enslaved, they could achieve a kind of freedom through valor. Each fight was a gamble, not only for survival, but for identity. In the arena, a gladiator could reclaim a sense of dignity denied to him in chains. His worth was measured not by birth or wealth, but by the roar of the crowd and the respect of his peers. The Roman audience saw in the gladiator a reflection of their own ideals: discipline, courage, and mastery over fear. Even emperors admired the spirit of the fighters, occasionally stepping into the arena themselves, as Emperor Commodus infamously did, seeking to taste that dangerous admiration. For a rare few, the reward was literal freedom, symbolized by the rudis, a wooden sword given to a gladiator who had earned release after years of service. Receiving the rudis was the ultimate honor, a recognition that a man had proven himself beyond death. Freed gladiators, called rudiari, sometimes became trainers or referees, forever remembered for their valor. Some names still echo through history. Spartacus, the Thracian slave, led the greatest rebellion Rome ever faced, commanding tens of thousands in a desperate bid for liberty. Flamma, a Syrian gladiator, was offered freedom 4 times but refused, choosing to fight until death, a legend of loyalty to the code of the arena. Marcus Attilius, a freeborn Roman who voluntarily became a gladiator, defeated veterans twice his experience, earning instant fame. These men embodied the essence of the gladiatorial paradox: enslaved yet exalted, doomed yet eternal. In the end, every gladiator knew his fate was written in blood. But for those who mastered both combat and courage, death itself became their path to immortality. The story of Spartacus is one of the most powerful and enduring legends of ancient Rome. The tale of a man who rose from slavery to challenge an empire. Born in Thrace, a rugged region north of Greece, Spartacus was once a soldier, skilled in battle and leadership. Captured by Roman forces, he was sold into slavery and eventually trained as a gladiator at the Ludus Capuanus in Capua, one of the largest and harshest training schools in Italy. There, like thousands of others, he was forced to fight for Roman entertainment, but beneath his chains burned a warrior's pride and a longing for freedom. In 73 BCE, Spartacus and about 70 other gladiators launched a daring escape. Armed first with kitchen knives and makeshift weapons, they fought their way out of the Ludus, seizing wagons full of arms and armor along the way. They fled to Mount Vesuvius, where their numbers quickly swelled as slaves from farms and estates joined them. What began as a desperate bid for freedom turned into a full-scale uprising, the Third Servile War, the largest slave revolt in Roman history. At its height, Spartacus's rebel army numbered over 70,000 men, slaves, shepherds, and deserters, all united by a common cause: to break free from Rome's chains. Spartacus proved a brilliant commander, defeating several Roman legions sent against him. His tactics were unconventional and cunning, using the terrain to ambush larger forces and moving swiftly to avoid capture. His victories humiliated Rome, which had never imagined that its slaves could pose such a threat. For 2 years, he kept the Republic on edge, marching through Italy and even threatening Rome itself. But Rome's vengeance was relentless. In 71 BCE, the Senate appointed Marcus Licinius Crassus to crush the rebellion. Spartacus's army, divided and weary, was eventually trapped and destroyed in southern Italy. Spartacus himself fell in battle, fighting bravely to the end. In a display of Rome's ruthless power, 6,000 captured were crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies lining the road from Capua to Rome, a grim warning to all who might dream of defiance. Though his rebellion failed, Spartacus's legacy endured. To the Romans, he was a criminal and a threat to order. To later generations, he became a symbol of resistance, courage, and the yearning for freedom. His name came to represent the indomitable spirit of the oppressed, a man who, though enslaved, dared to fight for the one thing Rome could never grant voluntarily: liberty. By the twilight of the Roman Empire, the gladiatorial games, once the beating heart of Roman entertainment and power, began to fade. What had once symbolized Rome's might, wealth, and discipline gradually became a symbol of excess, cruelty, and moral decay. The decline of the games was not the result of a single cause, but a slow convergence of economic hardship, shifting values, and religious transformation. Economically, the empire could no longer sustain the immense costs of the spectacles. Training and maintaining gladiators required huge sums, feeding them, housing them, and providing medical care. The grand amphitheaters demanded maintenance, and the exotic animals imported for Venetian animal hunts came at staggering expense. As Rome's economy faltered under corruption, invasions, and inflation, emperors and governors found it increasingly difficult to fund these lavish events. What was once a tool to win public favor had become an unbearable financial burden. Morally, the Roman elite began questioning the ethics of such bloodshed. Philosophers like Seneca and Cicero had long criticized the games as degrading to both spectators and society. What pleasure, Seneca once asked, can a man find in seeing another man being murdered? As centuries passed, such voices grew louder, especially with the rise of Christianity, which directly opposed the pagan traditions that glorified death and violence. Christian teachings emphasized the sanctity of human life, mercy, and forgiveness. The early church condemned the games as sinful spectacles that celebrated cruelty. When Constantine the Great embraced Christianity in the 4th century CE, he began restricting gladiatorial combat. While the games did not vanish immediately, their spirit was broken. By the time of Emperor Honorius, Christianity had become the dominant faith of the empire. In 404 CE, after the death of a monk named Telemachus, who is said to have leapt into the arena to stop a fight and was killed by the crowd, Honorius issued an edict banning gladiatorial combat once and for all. With the gladiators gone, Rome sought new forms of spectacle. Chariot races in the Circus Maximus became the new obsession, drawing tens of thousands of spectators. Theatres, religious festivals, and political displays replaced the blood-soaked sand of the arena. Yet the shadow of the gladiators lingered, an echo of an age when life and death were entertainment. When courage was tested before roaring crowds, the fall of the games marked more than the end of a sport. It was the end of an era, a transformation from the brutality of pagan Rome to the moral and spiritual awakening of a new world. The legacy of the gladiator endures far beyond the crumbling stones of the Colosseum. For ancient Rome, these warriors were more than mere entertainers. They embodied the empire's ideals of courage, discipline, endurance, and the spectacle of power. To Romans, the arena reflected life itself, harsh, unpredictable, and demanding strength in the face of death. The gladiator's courage under the gaze of thousands became a metaphor for Rome's own dominance, a civilization built on mastery, order, and conquest. Yet the fascination with gladiators never died with the empire. Their legend was reborn in modern times, in films like Spartacus 1960 and Gladiator 2000, where the sand and blood of the arena became symbols of rebellion, honor, and humanity against tyranny. Today's sports arenas echo that same structure. Vast crowds cheering, athletes performing at the limits of endurance, and victory or defeat broadcast to the world. The modern athlete, like the gladiator, is celebrated for strength, bravery, and spectacle. The soldier too embodies the discipline and sacrifice that once defined the men of the arena. But behind the admiration lies a deep paradox, the same one that haunted Rome. We glorify their courage, yet we cannot ignore the cruelty that created their legend. They were slaves, forced to kill for applause, yet we romanticize them as heroes of freedom and defiance. Perhaps that is why their story still captivates us. The gladiator stands at the eternal crossroads between violence and virtue, oppression and glory, mortality and immortality. In every fight for fame, in every stadium roar, the spirit of the Roman gladiator lives on, a timeless symbol of humanity's struggle to find meaning, even in the face of death. The story of the gladiator is, ultimately, the story of humanity itself, our endless hunger for glory, spectacle, and the thrill of survival. In the sands of the Colosseum, men fought not just for life, but for meaning, under the gaze of a world that demanded both entertainment and courage. Their blood fed an empire's pride. Their deaths shaped its identity, and their endurance became legend. The arena was a mirror, reflecting the noblest and darkest impulses of humankind. Bravery, cruelty, loyalty, and the desire to be remembered. Though centuries have passed, the echo of those battles has never truly faded. Today, our arenas are digital, our weapons symbolic. Yet the same pulse beats beneath it all. We still cheer for victory, crave drama, and glorify those who risk everything for fame. The gladiator in every arena, ancient or modern. Rome still echoes. The roar of the crowd, the clash of will, the pursuit of immortality through courage. These remain as alive today as they were beneath the Roman sun.